So just a little bit on the status of legislation. Of course, there's the California AB 2514, which is really a mandate for setting procurement goals, targets. And then there is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is not about mandates, but it's about how do you provide compensation that reflects the benefits. And so a little bit of the history of California AB 2514. It was, of course, signed into law last year. And I think the PUC has been very aggressive and active in acting upon that. They've had a number of meetings so far. Back in April, they had a pre-hearing. Just 2 weeks ago, they had a workshop on this, and there will be further workshops down the road. So things are moving. It's hard to say at this point what kind of requirements for energy storage are going to come up with, but I think it's certainly looking positive. Turning to the FERC and their attempts to change in their rulemaking. There have been a couple of different requests for public comment on how does one address the compensation issue. Earlier this year, there was a notice of proposed rulemaking that was sent out. It generated a lot of comments. That was followed up last month by another essentially request for comments, except it's called a notice of inquiry. So that comment period is still open, and there's really quite a bit of different options about how does one compensate energy storage. So there's there's clear consensus that there should be a change to pay for performance. There is not necessarily a clear consensus on exactly how to do that. A couple other pieces of legislation, or a couple bills that were introduced into the Senate last year. The Storage 2010 Act, introduced by Senator Bingaman, and also the Clean Energy Technology Leadership Act, introduced by Senator Kerry. Both of these bills would have provided tax incentives, tax credits for installation for energy storage technologies. However, neither of these have yet to be enacted into law. I'm going to skip, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through this history stuff on AB 2514. Conceptually, here is what the FERC is trying to achieve in what they call just and reasonable compensation. The system cost for energy storage is greater than the benefits that are monetized strictly from frequency regulation under the existing definitions and terms. It doesn't reflect the ability of energy storage to ramp up or ramp down much more quickly than other peaking units. So the question is, how do you set a fair margin on the benefits that are not yet monetized? Is it 5% above system cost? Is there another way to do it? Again, all this is being worked out. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about vehicle electrification. Sometimes the question is asked, well, if we electrify all the vehicles, what is, in a macro scale, national scale, what does that do in terms of generating capacity? Or we're going to have to build new plants to charge these vehicles and so on and so forth. Pacific Northwest National Lab has done a study, and There's a lot of off-peak capacity there, and the magnitude of that off-peak capacity is such that it could handle the charging requirements of a vast majority of the light-duty vehicle fleet that's out there. So their conclusion was that 73% of the light-duty of today's cars using off-peak energy could be charged. From a utilities point of view, you know, if you can use that off-peak capacity without installing any more infrastructure, that's certainly a good thing for them. It's also a good thing for the consumers in the sense that it would drive down, put pressure on lower rates. The CO2 emissions would certainly benefit. So there's probably less concern about capacity than a naive person might first think. But it has to be done in a smart way. Again, this is from the Pacific Northwest National Lab study looking at the difference between smart charging and dumb charging. They based look at a national household travel survey about vehicle driving patterns, you know, time of day driving and so forth. And in the absence of smart charging, most people would come home from work at the 5 or 6 o'clock time, plug in their vehicle, and start charging. On the other hand, a smart charger would allow you to delay the beginning of charging until 10 p.m. or later, and of course this would shift the peak load from the majority of that load into the off-peak times. Smart charging and smart grid, we heard a lot about this in the last talk. I think one of the things that DOE is trying to do is to promote development of standards, particularly communication standards between the vehicle and the grid. There's a number of organizations that are working on these standards, and in the U.S. it's primarily the SAE standards, the J1772 and others. In Japan it's the Japanese SAE. In Europe it's primarily the IEC who's developing these standards. These organizations are talking to each other, so hopefully when it's all said and done, there will be some commonality throughout the world in terms of communication standards. Another aspect touched on a little bit about smart grid, and is the ability for providing help in maintaining the health of the battery system itself, being able to have the charger provide that information. So, as I said before, smart charging and smart grid are collaborative. Each one helps the other. I took this quote from the Electrification Coalition, which is a coalition of utilities and others that are promoting the electrification of vehicles. And one of their concerns about the regulatory barriers is that they're looking for some assurance that that the investments by utilities and others in EV-related technologies will not be treated as imprudent by the regulators, to give them greater assurance to be more proactive in installing electric vehicle service equipment. And so there's some proactivity among groups like the Electrification Coalition to incorporate this into legislation. Finally, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the Department of Energy's investment in deployment of some of these technologies. In the Recovery Act, there was, as you know, $2 billion for battery manufacturing facilities. You can debate whether that's too little or too much. Somebody said yesterday that's a drop in the bucket. On the other hand, there are those who think that maybe there's a overcapacity in battery manufacturing, that we're going to be able to make hundreds of thousands of batteries a year, but is there going to be a market for that? So when you think about what the government should be doing, what role it is, should it have put more into battery facilities, or did it put too much already? I think that's a debatable point. I personally am glad to see, I think it was a tremendous boost to vehicle electrification to have that investment. Beyond that, there was a couple other major elements of the Recovery Act, specifically this one here on electrification demonstration projects. The last presentation we heard talked about deployment of level 2, level 3 chargers. That's actually just one of the 8 major projects that came out of this $400 million investment. I think Ecotality was the largest one. I think they talked about 13 or 14,000 chargers, but all the projects together, it's about 20,000. Deployment of 7,000 electric drive vehicles. Again, you can argue, is that a lot or is that not enough? It is what it is. And DOE doesn't print money. They have to deal with the resources that are given to them by Congress. So you can't say DOE should be doing more if it doesn't have the appropriations to do that. And in fact, in the FY12 budget request, there was a request for $200 million in FY12 for community electric vehicle demonstration projects. But I think there's little chance of that happening given the current focus on deficit reduction. There's a couple other elements to the overall project. Colin talked a little bit about, data collection, tracking the data, learning from the project. There's also an educational element, public outreach programs, getting the public and consumers more aware about what electrified vehicles are, what they can do, and so forth. Another major project under the Recovery Act was the Clean Cities program. There was $300 million under this program. Clean Cities itself is a 20-year-old program that's been around. In the past, it's focused primarily on alternative fuel vehicles, but in the last couple of years, there's a lot more emphasis on electric vehicles. And so under this $300 million program, again, there's a number of couple thousand electric and hybrid vehicles being deployed in these clean city coalitions. And then lastly, the smart grid, again, a big investment of $3.4 billion in the federal level, matched by industry money. It includes, things about smart meters and stuff like that, but it also includes some charging stations and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles as well. So to wrap up, I think given the advances in battery technology, given the recognition that there are additional benefits from energy storage to the grid that are not yet being captured, but soon will be, hopefully, that there's really never been a better time to integrate energy storage into the grid and into vehicles. There's a clear recognition that the regulatory changes need to catch up with the technology, and the government is doing its best to provide incentives and to remove barriers and to demonstrate the benefits of the technology. Thank you.